One June morning, a young woman and a little girl are walking up a mountain in Switzerland. When they reach the village of Dorfli, an older woman calls to them.
Dieter, where are you going? Is that the daughter of your late sister?
Yes, Babel. I'm taking her to her grandfather.
Please don't. He's very strange these days. He never visits the village, and he speaks to nobody.
But I've got new work in Frankfurt. I can't take care of Heidi now.
Just then, Peter, the young goatherd, arrives. He takes Dieter and Heidi up to the old man's hut.
Here's your granddaughter, Heidi,
says Dieter when they arrive.
She must stay with you. I can't take care of her anymore.
What?
The old man cries.
Get out of here, Dieter, and don't come back.
Goodbye, Heidi,
Dieter says. She goes quickly down the mountain. Peter goes back to his goats. Heidi looks about her.
Oh, grandfather, it's beautiful up here,
she says. The old man says nothing, but he takes her into the hut. Heidi finds a wonderful room there, the hayloft. All that afternoon, Grandfather makes a little chair for Heidi. That evening, she sits in it at dinner. She loves it. That night, there is lots of wind. Grandfather goes up to the hayloft. Heidi is sleeping there. He smiles when he sees this and goes down to bed happily. Early the next morning, Peter comes to the hut for Grandfather's goats.
Can Heidi come up the mountain with me?
He asks the old man.
Do you want to?
Grandfather asks Heidi.
Yes,
She answers.
Take good care of her.
Grandfather tells Peter. Up on the mountain, the goats eat hungrily. Peter lies down and sleeps. Heidi doesn't sleep. She looks at all the beautiful blue and yellow flowers. Later, Peter sits up.
Lunchtime,
He says. Heidi gives some of her lunch to him because he hasn't got much. Suddenly, Peter gets up. One of the goats is near a cliff. Peter begins to run to it, but he falls down. Quickly, Heidi picks some flowers and calls the goat. It comes to her and away from the cliff. Peter begins hitting it angrily.
stop!
Heidi cries.
Can I have some of your lunch tomorrow?
Yes, and every day. But promise me one thing. Never hit a goat again.
All right.
Peter laughs. Back in Grandfather's hut, Heidi talks about her wonderful day. Not long after that, she is sleeping happily up in the hayloft. Every day, Heidi goes up the mountain with Peter. But soon the days are colder. In winter, Peter must leave the mountains and go to school in Dorfli. He doesn't like that. One day, Peter comes up to the hut.
Can Heidi visit us? My grandmother wants to meet her.
He says.
Of course she can.
Grandfather says. 2 days after that, Grandfather takes Heidi to Grandmother's little house.
Hello? It's me, Heidi.
She calls at the door.
Oh, Heidi! Come in! Peter talks about you a lot.
The old woman says.
Brigitte,
She asks her daughter.
can you look at Heidi and tell me all about her?
She's beautiful, Mother.
Grandmother, can't you see me?
Heidi asks.
No, Heidi. My eyes don't work. I can't see a thing.
Oh.
Heidi begins to cry at that. But the old woman says,
Don't cry. Tell me, do you like living with Grandfather?
Suddenly, there is a loud noise in the house.
Listen to that. This old house is falling down, I tell you.
Grandmother says. Mother can't sleep at night because the house moves in the wind, says Brigitte. Back home, Heidi asks Grandfather,
Can you fix Grandmother's house? Please?
In the end, he says yes. After that, when Heidi visits Grandmother, Grandfather goes too and works on the house. Soon it is okay, and Grandmother can sleep well in her bed again. These are happy times for Heidi. But after 2 years, the village pastor visits Grandfather's hut one day. He looks at Heidi and Grandfather, and he doesn't smile.
Why am I here?
He asks them.
Do you know? Heidi's nearly 8 now.
The pastor says.
When winter comes, she must go to school.
Through all the snow? I can't send her down the mountain then.
Grandfather says.
No,
The pastor smiles.
but you can come down and live in your old house in Dorfli this winter. Heidi can easily go to school from there.
Never.
Grandfather says.
The villagers don't like me.
That's not true,
Answers the pastor.
Please come back to the village this winter.
I can't.
Grandfather says. The pastor leaves soon after. He is not happy. The next day, Aunt Dieter arrives at the hut.
Why are you here?
Cries Grandfather.
For Heidi.
She says.
Listen. I'm working for a nice family in Frankfurt. One of their friends, Herr Sessemann, has lots of money, but his daughter Clara is very ill. She's in a wheelchair. Herr Sessemann's often away for work, and Clara misses her late mother. She needs a young friend. Heidi can come and live in their wonderful house, play with Clara, wear beautiful things, and learn.
Stop.
Grandfather says angrily. But Dieter doesn't stop.
Heidi's nearly 8, and she can't read or write. She can't stay here.
Grandfather looks at Dieter darkly.
Then take the child and go.
He cries.
But I never want to see her here again.
And he quickly leaves the hut.
I'm not going with you, Aunt Dieter.
Heidi cries.
Oh, yes, you are.
Dieter answers. She takes Heidi by the hand and she pulls her down the mountain. 2 days later, they arrive at the Sessemann's house in Frankfurt. Clara likes Heidi at once. But Fräulein Rottenmeier, the housekeeper, wants to send her away.
Clara's 12.
She says.
So how can a little girl of 8 be her friend? Take her away.
But Aunt Dieter says goodbye quickly and Heidi stays. Heidi likes Clara a lot, but she misses her home in the mountains. From her window, she can only see houses. One day, she runs out into the streets of Frankfurt and looks for a tower. Perhaps from there, she can see better. In the end, she finds a tower, and a nice man there takes her up it. But what can she see when she looks across the town? More houses!
Oh,
She cries.
where are the mountains?
The man says,
There are no mountains here, but I've got some kittens in my room. Would you like some?
Yes, please.
Heidi cries. He gives 2 kittens to Heidi. She puts them in her pockets at once, and then walks quickly back to the Sessemann's house. When she arrives, Fräulein Rottenmeier is very angry.
You must never leave the house again alone, you bad girl,
she says. Suddenly, she hears a strange noise from Heidi.
What's that?
Cries Fräulein Rottenmeier.
My kittens.
Heidi smiles. She takes them out of her pockets.
Ugh! Take them away.
Fräulein Rottenmeier cries. She doesn't like cats. Clara likes the kittens, so they stay. But after that, the housekeeper is more and more unfriendly to Heidi, and Heidi feels more and more homesick.
I must leave soon,
she thinks. After some weeks, she is ready. Early one morning, she is walking out of the front door when someone behind her says,
And where are you going?
She looks back slowly and, oh no, Fräulein Rottenmeier is looking at her with angry eyes.
Answer me, girl. Where are you going?
The housekeeper asks Heidi angrily.
home.
Heidi answers.
But this is your home now. Do you want to leave Clara here alone?
No,
Heidi says.
but I must go to grandfather. I miss him, Peter, grandmother, the goats, and the mountains. I can't live without them.
The housekeeper's face is very red now.
You bad child.
She cries.
Go to your room this minute and never leave this house again.
A day or two later, Clara calls Heidi to her room.
My father's back home.
She says happily.
And he wants to speak to the two of us.
Just then, Herr Sesemann comes in. He takes Clara in his arms. After that, he has a nice talk with her and Heidi. Then he smiles and leaves them. He goes to Fräulein Rottenmeier and tells her,
You're wrong about Heidi. She's not a bad child. Clara likes her very much, and Heidi's good for my daughter.
he says.
But
Fräulein Rottenmeier begins.
So don't tell me any more stories about the little Swiss girl. Do you understand?
Herr Sesemann says.
yes, Herr Sesemann.
Fräulein Rottenmeier answers.
Now, I'm leaving again for work in 2 days, but my mother's coming soon. I don't want any problems when she's here.
He says.
No, Herr Sesemann.
The housekeeper says. Grandmama Sesemann loves Heidi when they meet, and she is very good to the little girl. She gives some picture books to her, and with her help, Heidi soon learns to read. Heidi loves reading. With a book in her hands, she forgets that she is homesick. Clara and Heidi are happy when Grandmama Sesemann is staying with them. But after she leaves, Heidi feels more homesick than before. Some days later, strange things begin to happen in the Sesaman's house. Every morning, the front door is open. Fräulein Rottenmeier tells two of the servants,
Perhaps it's a ghost. You must watch the hall tonight and see.
When they later see something white in the dark hall, they run and tell the housekeeper. She writes to Herr Sesaman that night,
Strange things are happening here. Please come home.
Herr Sesaman arrives the next afternoon and speaks to the servants. They tell him about the white thing in the dark. After that, he has a long talk about ghosts with a doctor friend of his, Dr. Classen. Late that night, they suddenly hear a noise in the hall. What is it? They go and look. There, by the open door, stands Heidi in her white nightdress. She is walking in her sleep.
Heidi!
Herr Sesaman cries.
What are you doing here, my child?
She opens her eyes.
Where am I?
She says.
Leave this to me.
Dr. Classen tells Herr Sesaman. He takes Heidi to her room and talks to her quietly there.
You aren't happy. What's the problem?
He asks. At first, she tells him nothing. But in the end, she says,
Every night I dream about my mountain home. I hear the wind, and I go to the door of the hut and look out. But in the morning, I'm back in Frankfurt.
She begins to cry.
Don't cry, little Heidi,
says the doctor.
Every problem has an answer.
He goes back to Herr Sesaman.
Heidi's very ill,
He says.
She must leave for Switzerland at once.
What can Herr Sesaman do? Heidi can't stay ill. But Clara can't lose her friend. In the end, he finds the answer to this problem. He speaks to the two girls.
You're very homesick.
He tells Heidi.
And you need to return home to the mountains. Dr. Classen says this, and he's right, I think.
But, Father...
Clara begins.
Please, Clara.
Says Herr Sesaman.
Let's think of Heidi now. What's best for her? But I promise you, daughter, you can visit her in Switzerland very soon.
Then he says to Heidi,
So, are your bags ready? Because your journey home begins early tomorrow morning.
2 days later, Heidi arrives at the village of Dorfli. Before she goes to her grandfather's hut, she visits Peter's house. She gives nice presents from Clara to Peter's mother and grandmother.
Thank you,
they say.
Now, please don't go.
I must. But I can come back tomorrow.
Heidi promises. Then she hurries up the mountain. When she reaches her grandfather's hut, she calls,
Grandfather! It's me! Heidi! I'm back!
Grandfather comes out of the hut and looks at her. He is very surprised. Suddenly, he takes her in his arms and he laughs.
Oh, Heidi, is it truly you?
He cries. The next day, Heidi goes and sees grandmother again.
Well, do you like living in Frankfurt?
The old woman asks. Heidi tells grandmother all about it. Suddenly, Heidi remembers something and she laughs.
Oh, and I can read now,
She says.
Can I read to you?
Yes, please.
Answers grandmother. For the next hour, Heidi reads to her.
You can read beautifully.
The old woman says when she finishes. Back at grandfather's hut, grandfather gives a big old book to Heidi and he says,
Read to me from this.
She opens the book and reads a wonderful story to him.
Once, a young man leaves home and goes to a far town. At first, he has lots of money and many friends there. Then he loses all his money and his friends, and he is alone and sad. In the end, he returns home with nothing. But his father isn't angry. Here's something nice to wear and something good to eat, the old man says, because he feels happy to see his son again.
When Heidi stops reading, grandfather is very quiet. The next morning, Sunday, he takes Heidi to church. The people there are very surprised when they see him arrive with his granddaughter. After they leave the church, grandfather goes to the pastor and says,
I'm coming to live in the village this winter. Heidi can go to school more easily from here.
Good.
Smiles the pastor. Back in Frankfurt, Clara asks Herr Sessemann every day,
Father, when can we visit Heidi?
He always answers,
Soon, daughter, very soon.
But when he thinks about the long journey, he feels afraid.
Is it a good idea for Clara to go?
He thinks. In the end, he speaks to Dr. Classen about it.
Doctor,
He asks,
can Clara visit her friend Heidi in Switzerland this autumn?
the doctor answers sadly.
No, she can't. The journey is long, and your daughter isn't very strong. You must be very careful with her. I know this story well. Remember last spring? I'm alone now, because my young daughter is dead. But I can never forget her.
When Herr Sessemann sees his old friend Dr. Klassen's sad face, suddenly he has an idea.
Would you like to go to Switzerland?
He says.
You can visit Heidi, and when you return to Frankfurt, you can answer my question truly. Can my daughter Clara make this journey?
What a good idea.
Dr. Classen says.
Do you want to go?
Asks Herr Sessemann.
Of course.
Laughs the doctor. Every morning that summer after Heidi's return, she goes up the mountain with Peter and his goats. Peter loves being with Heidi up on the mountain, but he doesn't tell her about this. Then one morning, Heidi comes out of Grandfather's hut with an old letter from Clara in her hand, and she tells Peter,
I can't go with you today. I must stay here.
Why?
the goat herd asks. Heidi opens the letter and gives it to Peter.
Because it's nearly autumn, and Clara and her grandmother are coming soon. I must be here to meet them,
She says.
But Grandfather's here. They can wait for you in the hut with him.
Peter says.
No, Peter.
Heidi says.
Clara's my best friend. I must be here when she arrives.
Peter is angry. He says nothing, but he gives back the letter to Heidi quickly. Then he walks up the mountain after the goats. Not long after that, 2 people come up the mountain one morning. Heidi sees them from far away.
It's Clara and her grandmother. They're here.
She cries to Grandfather. But when the people come nearer, she sees her mistake. They are Dr. Classen and a man from the village with the doctor's bags. Heidi is very sad at first about this, but she feels better when Dr. Classen tells her,
Clara and her grandmother are coming in the spring.
The doctor likes talking to Grandfather, and they are soon good friends. They go for long walks over the beautiful mountains nearly every day. There interesting talks, their healthy walks, and the mountain air are good for the doctor. He soon feels well again. When he returns to Frankfurt, he's a new man, a happier man. When winter comes, Grandfather moves from his mountain hut down to his old house in Dorfli. Heidi goes to the village school. She likes learning there a lot, and she's a very good student. The winter that year is very bad, with lots of snow. So Peter can't go down the mountain to school every day. Of course, he isn't very sad about that. One day, after school, Heidi goes up the mountain to visit him and his grandmother. Their little house is very cold and dark, and Grandmother isn't feeling well. But when Heidi reads to her, the old woman smiles.
Do you want to read to Grandmother too?
Heidi asks Peter the next day at school.
She'd like that, I know.
But how can I? I can't read. You know that.
Peter answers her angrily.
You can learn to do it. I can teach you.
Heidi says. And so, every afternoon, Peter visits Heidi, and she teaches him. She's a good teacher, and soon Peter can read nicely to his grandmother. This makes the old woman very happy. When the long, cold, dark winter finishes, spring comes to the mountain. Heidi feels more and more excited. Every day, she waits and watches for Clara and her grandmother.
When are they coming?
She thinks. In the end, the big day arrives. Heidi sees some people far down the mountain. Slowly, they come nearer.
Clara! Grandmama!
Heidi cries, and she runs and meets them.
Oh, Heidi,
Says Clara.
do you live here? It's beautiful.
Hello there, Heidi.
Smiles Grandmama Sesamon, and she takes Heidi in her arms. When they reach the hut, Grandfather is waiting for them. He says,
Hello.
warmly. Soon, he and Grandmama Sesamon are talking and laughing in front of the hut. After Grandfather puts Clara in her wheelchair, Heidi takes her for a little walk. When they return, Clara can't stop talking about the beautiful mountains. Grandmother Sesamon smiles and says,
I'm staying in a hotel in the nearest town. But would you like to stay here in the mountains with Heidi?
Can I?
Clara asks.
Yes.
Says Grandfather.
You can.
Says Grandmama.
Oh, good!
cries Heidi excitedly. Clara loves her new home, and with the mountain air and healthy things to eat, she feels stronger every day. But not everybody is happy about that. Every morning, when Peter comes for grandfather's goats, he asks Heidi,
Are you coming up the mountain today?
Heidi always answers,
No, I can't push Clara's wheelchair up the mountain. So I must stay here with her.
That makes Peter angry. Then one morning, Heidi smiles at Peter and says,
Clara and I can come up the mountain with you today. Because grandfather is coming too. And he can push the wheelchair.
Peter says nothing. But when nobody is looking, he takes Clara's wheelchair and he pushes it over a cliff and runs away.
Where's my wheelchair?
Cries Clara when grandfather carries her out of the hut. Grandfather and Heidi go and look for it everywhere, but they can't find it.
Oh no! Now I can't go up the mountain,
Says Clara.
Yes, you can.
Says grandfather quickly, and he carries her up. After he puts her down carefully in a meadow, he goes back down and looks once more for the wheelchair. In the end, he finds it down the cliff.
Peter?
He cries. At first, Clara is happy on the mountain. But then she sees some beautiful flowers far from her up the meadow. She feels sad because she can't walk over to them.
I can carry you,
Says Heidi.
No, you can't. You need to be stronger for that.
Clara says to her friend.
Wait! I've got an idea! Peter!
Heidi cries. Slowly, Peter comes to her.
What is it?
He says angrily.
I want to carry Clara to the flowers. Can you help me?
Heidi asks him. Clara stands, and Peter and Heidi take her arms. With their help, she moves slowly up the meadow. She is looking at the flowers. Suddenly, she moves away from her friends, and she begins to walk alone.
Clara!
Heidi cries.
You can walk!
Oh, yes! You're right, Heidi. I can!
Answers Clara. The next day, Clara's grandmother visits them. Grandfather tells her about the wheelchair. And when Clara walks in front of her, Grandmama can't believe her eyes. In a hurry, she writes a quick letter to her son.
Important. Come at once.
Soon after that, Herr Sesamon arrives. When he is near Grandfather's hut, Clara and Heidi walk down to him.
Clara!
He cries.
You're walking!
Yes, Father, I am. You can thank Heidi and her grandfather for that.
Later that day, when it is nearly time for the Sesamons to leave, Grandmama has a quiet talk with Peter.
You're sorry about Clara's wheelchair. I know that. And you're not a bad boy. So I'm not angry with you. Everyone can make a mistake. And now Clara doesn't need her wheelchair. She can walk. So please, make a wish. What would you like most of all?
A whistle,
He answers. Grandmama laughs at that and gives some money to him.
With this, you can buy a new whistle every week for the next 50 years, Peter,
She says. After that, she and Herr Sesamon talk to Grandfather.
My good friend,
Herr Sesamon says.
how can we thank you for everything? You don't need to thank me.
Grandfather says.
Oh, yes, we do. Make a wish, please.
Herr Sesamon says to the old man.
A wish? Okay, but it's for Heidi, not for me.
For Heidi.
Says Grandmama.
Yes, she's happier up here in the mountains than in towns or villages.
Grandfather says.
So I want to leave my hut to her when I die.
Herr Sesamon smiles and says,
Then Heidi can have all the money she needs to stay here. It's our present to her. She's nearly family after all.
After that, Clara takes Heidi in her arms and they say goodbye sadly. Then Clara says,
But I'm coming back next summer. And every summer after that. I promise.
See you next summer then.
laughs Heidi.
I can't wait.
And not long after that, Herr Sesamon, Grandmama and Clara begin the long journey home.